So, welcome everyone. Welcome back, Michele. Welcome back. Oh, Myra's not here yet. Hey, welcome back, Myra. Cool. So let us jump in. Couple of announcements. Which I'll let you read through. What I wanted to dive into is Michele and I have been talking through over the last few weeks. We've been talking about trying to put together a sort of a better way to articulate delivery team split. So we originally, some probably months ago now, had the scaling the delivery team issue, where we kind of talked a little bit about things that the teams may end up owning. And as we've been going through Q3, we've been sort of talking about this more as well. What we want to do is kind of continue to iterate on that and get a sort of fuller description in place on the handbooks to help ourselves, but also help people outside the teams. So what I have done is we've got this visual that maybe explains things in a slightly different way. I'll talk it through briefly, and then hopefully there are questions and kind of comments and things so we can continue to improve this. So let me just share my screen. So this is very much a target state. It in no way reflects how things are today, but it probably gives some sort of slight overview of probably auto deploy. So auto deploy kind of is all of the things right now, and in the future hopefully we'll have a bit more separation going on. So starting at the bottom, we have reliability. So reliability own a certain degree of our environments and our kind of our servers and database and things like that, and that I'm sure will change over time, but just to kind of make sure we reflect their kind of ownership and involvement in this process as well. And then for system, thinking about this as sort of systems that we can grow around and kind of that will support us scaling. So I've been thinking about this as sort of like services that in no way exist right now, but which perhaps in the future give us a way so that, you know, there is a way to deploy to staging and there is a way to check environment health. And it's perhaps a little bit less coupled to auto deploys than it is right now, but the system team has the ability to kind of scale and grow the services that we have in place to handle deployment of changes onto the environments we have. I think Michele made a great comment about like this sort of the sort of focusing on additional ways to deploy and like different uses of clusters and kind of scaling things in those ways, which we haven't previously had chance to do any of. So I think those are things that will hopefully be interesting kind of future directions for us. So, and then on the orchestration side at the top, I've written this out as a kind of generic pipeline because actually it sort of doesn't matter, or hopefully it gives us a way of scaling the sort of like the deployment, so growing into auto deploys or whatever our next iterations of deployments, but orchestration, spending our time focusing on what are the individual pieces that we need in order to get code changes through a deployment pipeline. So we'll be very much worried about how do we track these things accurately? Do we have tests running in the right place and are migrations running? A couple of points. And at the moment, this very loosely, this wasn't a sort of guideline, but at the moment, this very loosely kind of matches up with the downstream trigger jobs that we do have on auto deploys. But at those points where we sort of say, okay, we have this change and it's gone through the tracking that we need it to track, we're at the point of deploying it. And then we hand over to a system and say, you know, deploy this image or this package onto the servers as needed, and then we get back a sort of yes or no or some sort of status on how that's gone before we continue. So this is super high level and fairly abstract, but I wanted to maybe see if people had thoughts on, in terms of us thinking about separation and kind of having two distinct independent teams that can kind of fully own domains, but which within each domain we're able to scale to kind of a future state. Are there any questions or thoughts around us sort of thinking about teams in this way?
Do you have an issue where this slide, or this diagram rather, is probably located? Because I
We
feel
will
like
do.
I feel like I've got feedback, but I need to think about it a little bit before I try
That's
to
perfectly fine. Yeah, what I'll do is,
articulate what I'm thinking.
yeah, absolutely. What I'll do then is I'll pop this up somewhere. And but you'll have access to this, right? This is in the agenda, so you can all see this. But are there I guess to put that back to you, Scarlett, like what do you want to have, like a kind of discussion issue about how this looks, or how do you want to take this forwards?
Let's start with the discussion. I don't.
Okay.
I think it's going to be more like, let's clarify a few things. Maybe readjust the diagram for at least one thing that's on my mind. But again, I want to think about this
Okay,
before.
that's fine. Cool. All right. Does anyone else have any questions or comments they want to go through right now?
Or big concerns? Red flags.
Cool. Okay, well, I'll put together a discussion issue. What I'll just quickly briefly show. So on the second slide, I've pulled out the metrics, or we've pulled out the metrics as a kind of a slight, probably one of our slightly more easy to think through components that will have shared links between both teams, as an example of how this could work. So we know we've got lots of metrics we can track in deployment pipelines. We know that at the moment we don't really have a kind of centralized place or way to do that. So thinking about that kind of in the same sort of split, we end up with system being able to kind of fully define and set up and manage what do we want a metrics service to look like, and how does that behave? And that's kind of our central point that all metrics from delivery live in. And then on the orchestration side, this gives us a place where all of our jobs in all of our pipelines can just be pushing in data that ends up giving us a really complete set of metrics. And both teams can use the metrics service to pull out dashboards that we need. So we start to have this thing where we kind of get orchestration contributing into something that system has created, and both teams are able to pull information out from the other side. Cool. All right, I will get an issue set up today and jot down roughly some things that I mentioned here, and see if we can get that sort of into a good discussion for you all to comment. If you don't want to comment on the issue, or you think you've got a stupid question, even though no questions are stupid, feel free to also ping on Slack or follow up with your manager in a one-to-one, or we're happy to have follow-up conversations as needed, so that we're all kind of in agreement on how this might look. Awesome. So release managers, which is Skarbek, because I just literally handed over to you.
Why does
Skarbek.
Ruben do this?
Well, I mean, he's on a public holiday, so I mean, I think that's a good
No.
excuse to say.
I'll share my screen. Last week, whoops, hang on. Okay, so last week went okay at the beginning. We did have a couple of like issues with, Omnibus. There was a change to the way CI was working, so that impacted deploys. But we were right in alignment with deploys and tag packages and promotions. So like we were going okay. There was a QA failure. I don't remember that. That must have happened during Ruin's time. The end of the week is where I had problems. On Friday, for example, we didn't get anything into production at all. We had an incident that Ruben was working when I started, and then another one fired up as soon as that one was pretty much finished, and we just couldn't get anything out the door. So yesterday was a little tough, but nothing that we could have done better, I don't think. this stuff just kind of piled up, which was unfortunate. And I don't really know what else to say outside of that fact. Like, there's no corrective actions that I could think of that happened last week that would have helped us in any way. I did create a improvement issue related to one particular issue where this is a process that all of us are familiar with, where if we need to like rush a particular fix into place, we use that same process if we need to pick something that needs to get into auto deploy quickly. I would like to try to improve that workflow, just because last week we did the pick auto deploy on a particular merge request, but then due to the scheduling of when auto deploy creates the next auto deploy branch, that pick never made it. So we would have never seen the fix for that particular problem until the next auto deploy package, which, that would have delayed us from the standard 3 hours to, well over 6 hours in that particular case. And I don't appreciate that. I'm trying to figure out if we could betterize that in some way, shape, or form. Deployment frequency, we did do slightly better. We ramped up to 10 deploys one day, but, Friday, actually, there shouldn't be a number for Friday. Why is there a number for Friday?
I suspect, but I don't know for sure. I suspect the Canary deployments count or sometimes count on here.
Oh.
I was going to do a bit of digging, but I think the numbers always look quite high compared to what I expect. So I think I think it's probably worth us digging into this a little bit.
I would agree, because this should say 0. We never made it to production on Friday.
Like, what's the number before that? Like 10. I can't think we've ever had 10.
Yeah, that looks kind of strange to me, because I feel like we created a few extras because of the incidents and us having to pick changes. So that makes sense that we had like a little more than like our standard cron schedule that creates prep branches, for example. But I don't think we deployed 10. So that, I think that's a little goofy in my opinion. So we should probably look. So
I think the shape is accurate, but I won't be surprised if they're all a little higher than they should be.
Lead time for changes. I think I expressed last week that I'm not entirely sure what to do with this chart, but 3 days. So we're higher than we were, but again, we didn't deploy anything on Friday. So I think us being high today completely makes sense. But again, it's strange to me that Friday, the lead time is lower than our bounds by a decent amount, but we didn't deploy anything on Friday. So I suspect that the same thing is feeding into this chart. So I think whatever investigation, Amy, in fact, if you want to fire up an issue, I think we should look at both of these charts and figure out where they're getting their data from.
That makes sense. I think this is probably linked to some of the issues Graham's been opening about environments, because all of this is tied to how an environment is set up and what the metrics think the environment is trying to do. So yeah, I'll open an issue.
Any questions for me regarding what I just showcased? Okay, so Amy, I had one question for you. You dropped in the handover message today about the blockers from last week. I'm curious if you're automatically gathering those in some way, shape, or form, or are you doing all this manually?
Yeah, this is all manual because nobody has come up with a way. But great news is I've got an idea. I think release managers should do the gathering, because then you're all much closer to the data we need and the report we need. So what we did previously was I don't think we were miles away, but this is sort of linked to the issue I opened a couple of weeks ago. So we originally talked about what's a good way to get the data tracking. The best version we've come up with so far is the labels. They're an okay solution, right? They're a little bit manual, but they work pretty well. But what we don't have a great thing on is actually the connection of timing. There's a bit of a lag on those. So quite often, as we gather, so as Michele and I gather up the data to fill in that epic, is when we notice, oh, hang on, didn't we have this problem? Or I saw in a handover message that we were blocked for a problem, or or we come across something, and it's at that point. So that's the problem I think we really need to solve, because if we run any automated result like reports off the labels, which is pretty easy to do, we're not going to get a complete set because we don't always label. So that's the piece I think we need to find a way of handling. Now, at the moment, we annotate that package graph. So I do think there's probably some way of linking together that what we annotate on there is exactly the same stuff that should get those labels. So it feels like we're kind of manually doing all the pieces, but we haven't really strung them together as a process.
Do we have an issue to address that exact precise concern, or is this just an ideation at this point?
Do you mean the one, so the
Gathering all the stuff
gathering up
automatically?
yeah, so one sec. So it's maybe a slight extension of this one, but from my my current feeling of what I've seen, or the way I've kind of gone through it, is that if we
I think I copy and pasted the issue you are referring, Amy.
Sorry, what's the question?
Oh no, I think you were searching for an issue, and then I
Yeah.
copy and
Found it
paste the
faster than
same
you.
issue. Yeah.
Myra wins.
Great, thanks. So yeah, this one I like. So thanks, Myra. So I think if we could automate this piece, we would have both, like we'd have an automated way to get the data we need. And just as a kind of, you may not see like an immediate what happens from that epic to the life getting better, but what we're using that epic for is looking for patterns. So one of the ones in the past that Myra had great success on was on the way quarantine MLs work. And we got that because we were able to go to quality and say, here are 3 or 4 examples over the last few months where we have very long recovery times linked to that stuff. And so they took an action. And I think what I'm seeing in the last few weeks is almost all of our blockers are coming either from software changes or from change requests. So those are kind of big groups that we can then start to drill into, right? Like in the future, how does reliability maintain the clusters actively without deployments being frequently blocked? And how did distribution do kind of the big intensive changes they've been doing recently without us blocking deployment? So we're really looking for patterns, which is why the kind of having the weekly data is super useful.
So my goal today is to look at that exact table. Since you were curious as to whether or not we've got everything, I'll try to look to ensure that we do indeed have everything. And I've already got a few ideas about how to automate some of this in some way, shape, or form. So I'll try to chime in on that issue as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabek.
The last thing I wanted to bring up was just a minor complaint that I'm not really sure how to address at the moment. One of the incidents I ran into, which technically was not a blocker just due to the timing in which things occurred, but if this were earlier in the day and there weren't other issues, this would have been a blocker. QA was failing in production on the Canary stage because Sidekick was overloaded. But this particular Sidekick shard doesn't really have the same SLIs as other shards. This is the imports shard that was simply overloaded with a lot of work. But because this is a shard that it's expected to take a really long time for it to complete, there's nothing that says, hey, how do I word this? There's nothing that states, hey, we're waiting for an import to happen. It's just further queued up right now, so you have to wait. So QA was failing because it's expecting projects to exist, but those projects come from a form of an import. Those import jobs were queued. They were queued because this is production, someone kicked off a bunch of imports that take over 5 hours to accomplish. So we were just stuck in a bottleneck inside a Sidekick, and we were never going to see QA pass until literally the next day. It was Saturday late afternoon, like right before my dinner time, that QA was finally at a point where Sidekick would process and import, therefore QA could be successful. I don't like this because this means if this shard becomes overloaded again in the future, we may run into failing QA, and there's nothing for us nor quality engineers to do. We could bring this and raise it up to the SRE on call, but there's really only two things that I see as a solution. One is to artificially scale up the importers to tackle some extra workload. We kind of want to shy away from that because doing that means that we're going to pull more data in, use more PG bouncer connections, potentially saturate that, but we're also overloading the import process in general. You know, we limit it for a reason, so we shy away from that. Or two, we wait, which I don't want to do because this is auto deploy and that's negatively impacting MTDP in that case. We do not have an issue for this because I don't know what to do.
Was there anything that happened? Like, was there an incident or anything when it was going on?
No incident was created, no.
Okay. Would you be able to create an issue? Because scalability are like the exact team to be thinking through what options we maybe have for this.
Okay.
So if
Should
we
I
can
use
make
the
it
scalability
visible.
tracker for that?
For now, I think put it in a release blocker issue so it matches our process, but you know, maybe give an account of what happened, impact we saw, and then if you give me a ping on it, I'll follow up with Rachel. We'll see what scalability can do, because even if there's no sort of immediate thing, then certainly we want them to be aware of that this is happening and here's the impact.
I could certainly do so.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Does anybody have anything else they want to bring up on the recording?